A boat with no one aboard. A few $100,000 of hull and explosive. Across from it, warships worth hundreds of millions apiece. In the Black Sea, the cheap boats did not just trade blows with that fleet, they drove it out of its own harbor. Look at the harbor they emptied, Sevastopol. For 240 years, the most heavily defended anchorage on Earth, home of Russia's Black Sea fleet. Today, it is empty. That fleet was not lost in the Great Naval Battle. There was no clash of squadrons, no war movie ending. It was priced out of its own sea, pushed off the water a piece at a time by Ukraine, a country whose navy, on paper, barely exists. So every headline now asks the obvious question. Run that same math against a $13 billion American supercarrier, 5,000 people aboard, the most expensive warship ever built. And does the cheap boat win here too? The internet already sells two answers. The carrier is obsolete, or the drone is a toy. Both are cheap. We are after the sharper question, the one the US Navy is quietly working through right now. Not whether a cheap boat can sink a great ship, but what that boat really costs the fleet, and where the bill actually lands. That is the whole job here at Navy Decoded. We count the dollars, measure the miles, and take the headline apart until only the math is left standing. Subscribe and let us run this one together. It starts with the story everyone thinks they already know. The version that went viral credits one machine, the drone boat. The record credits a sequence, a chain of weapons, each doing one job. The shore-launched missiles took the flagship, Moskva, a 12,000-ton guided missile cruiser, sunk 2 months into the war by a pair of Ukrainian cruise missiles fired from a friendly coast. Air-launched missiles tore open the dry docks that repaired damaged ships and the air defense rings that were supposed to make the harbor untouchable. Only then did the drone boats, low, small, a few $100,000 each, do the one thing missiles cannot. They kept coming back, night after night, until no pier in that harbor felt safe. By the summer of 2024, the last major warship pulled out. It has not come back. The drone did not empty that harbor alone. A system did. The lazy lesson is that this was Russia's problem and no one else's. Wrong lesson. That Navy adapted hard for 3 years. Nets across harbor mouths, helicopters on drone patrol, jamming that cut attacking boats adrift mid-run. But what broke through was not a weakness in that fleet. It was a shift in the battlefield itself, and it applies to every Navy on Earth. Cheap sea denial is nothing new. The naval mine has been cheap for a century, but a mine waits for you. These hunt you. Warfare found a new exchange rate, and it does not care whose flag is on the hull. No Navy read that sentence more carefully than the one with the most to lose. While the raids were still running, American officers were pulling them apart in real time. Every strike, every Russian countermove, both columns of the ledger, because their job is to carry those lessons across the Pacific, where an adversary builds cheap hulls by the thousand and the fleet's answer costs billions apiece. Sevastopol was not just Russia's disaster, it was a preview, and the US Navy sat in the front row taking notes. So let us take the number apart, where it was minted and whether it survives open water. So pull up a chair at that analyst desk. Before the Navy can copy this number, or fear it, one question comes first. Where did the number actually come from? Go to the night it was born. An October night early in the war. A handful of low gray boats slipped between the breakwaters of the most defended harbor on that sea. Boats with no one aboard, cameras where a helmsman would stand, each one costing a few $100,000. One of them reaches a frigate worth roughly $450 million. Riding its bow, hundreds of pounds of explosive, a warhead the weight of a heavy torpedo, carried by a hull you could buy for pocket change. By morning, the raid already had a dozen versions. Most were wrong. Those boats did not sink the frigate. It was still afloat, still repairable. A damaged radar, a scarred hull. Stop the story there, and the raid failed. But a fleet tells you the truth with its behavior, never with its statements. So watch what this one did next. Patrols cut back. Sorties shortened. The big hulls crept behind nets and booms, and increasingly simply stayed at the pier. Analysts watching it happen put it bluntly. The attack locked the fleet inside its own port. $1 million of small boats doing what a rival battle fleet would have needed billions to do. Their arithmetic came out to 450 to 1. The exact figure is debatable. The direction is not. This is where the Navy's analysts stopped celebrating and started reading the fine print. Because before anyone stamps that ratio on the side of an aircraft carrier, look hard at what every one of those strikes actually depended on. Not the drone. Geography. The Black Sea is small, a pond by ocean standards. Every target on it lived within reach of a friendly coastline. The boats left from home piers with full tanks, and their control links rode satellites back to bunkers ashore, where Ukrainian pilots, human beings, hundreds of nautical miles from the blast, kept the judgment while the machine kept the risk. Reach cost nothing. Talking to the boat cost nothing. A slow hull could cross the whole sea in a night or two of dark water. That was geography's first gift. The second gift mattered even more. The targets came home. Every patrol, every sortie ended at the same stretch of concrete, in a harbor whose coordinates have been printed on charts for 200 years. The hardest problem in all of naval warfare, finding the enemy, had already been solved by a map. Strip the sailor out of the hull, and you get a weapon the enemy cannot afford to trade with. A boat that costs less than the missile that kills it. That part is real, and every navy now has to live with it. But the ratio it produced was minted on top of those two gifts. Free reach. A target that could not leave. So the ratio is real, but it is not a law of nature. It is a receipt, printed by a specific set of conditions. That was the first note in the Navy's file. Do not fear the number, study the conditions that produce it. Then take those conditions out of that narrow sea and aim them at a target that refuses to sit still. A carrier strike group has one defense that predates every radar and every missile aboard. It moves. 25 knots, hour after hour, day after day. That is 600 nautical miles of ocean every 24 hours, roughly the distance from New York to Chicago, sailed daily in any direction the admiral pleases. Watch what that single fact does to the attacker's arithmetic. Suppose the attacker has perfect intelligence, a photograph of the carrier, exact position, time-stamped. And suppose that photograph is 24 hours old. In those 24 hours, the ship could have gone 600 nautical miles any way it liked. Draw that circle. It encloses more than 1 million square nautical miles of empty ocean. That is not a targeting problem. That is a lottery. That cheap drone is a courier, astonishingly cheap and reliable, to a fixed address. That is the whole trick. Now hand that courier a package for a man who is driving, without stopping, somewhere inside a country-sized stretch of land, turning whenever he likes. The courier is still cheap. The address is gone, and the address was the entire business. And the boat itself makes it worse. At 35 knots, a fast drone boat needs the better part of a day to cross 600 nautical miles, arriving where the target used to be. And in the Western Pacific, there is no friendly pier a night's cruise away. The nearest launch point can be thousands of nautical miles from the fight. Reach that was free in the Black Sea is the whole problem out here. Now, the obvious objection: satellites. A modern surveillance constellation photographs the ocean every single day. Doesn't that solve the search? This is where one distinction earns its keep. Seeing a ship and shooting a ship are different problems. A weapon needs a kill chain: detect, classify, track continuously, and hold targeting data fresh enough to fire on. A satellite in low orbit does not hover. It passes, and the next look at the same water may come 90 minutes later, long enough for the carrier to slide 37 nautical miles off the photograph into a fresh circle of 4,000 square nautical miles and growing. Then stack on the delays, processing the image, queuing a launch platform, the platform's own time to reach firing range. The rival fleet across the Pacific knows all of this, which is why it is spending billions on ocean surveillance satellites and over-the-horizon radar to buy back every link in the chain. Respect the effort, but every link costs money, adds lag, and can be jammed, spoofed, or blinded. None of it comes free the way a parked fleet did. At Sevastopol, the kill chain was a gift, the target moored beside a pier charted for 2 centuries. On open water, it is the single most expensive item in the attacker's budget, and the 450 never had to pay it. The weapons actually built for this, long-range ballistic missiles designed to hit moving ships, are a different animal and a different episode. The question here is the cheap boat, and against a strike group underway, it cannot cash its own discount. The search bill eats it, and all of that is before a single escort raises a radar. So the ocean hides a carrier the way that harbor never could. But the Navy's analysts underline the catch. That hiding place lasts only as long as the enemy's picture stays broken, and an adversary is spending billions to mend it. Call it the second note. Motion is armor, but only borrowed armor. Keeping it is not a reprieve. It is a contest the carrier has to win every single day, which leaves the attacker one way in that needs no picture at all, and never has to touch the hull. Because there is one place where the fleet cannot move, wherever it has promised to stand and defend. The Red Sea proved it. For months, American destroyers held station along a shipping corridor because escort duty pins a warship to the traffic it protects. Merchant hulls funnel through a strait barely 20 nautical miles wide on schedules anyone can read. A destroyer guarding that lane cannot use its 25 knots. It has to stay. Pin a warship to a patch of water, and you have rebuilt the harbor's arithmetic, one condition at a time. The Red Sea did not break the rule of the open ocean. It confirmed it. Geography, not the drone, is what hands the attacker the discount. And the bill arrived in public. Picture the choice inside the Combat Information Center. A slow contact crawls across the screen. $10,000 of airframe and explosive, a few minutes out. The cheapest answer, guaranteed to work, sits in a launch cell below deck, and it costs a little over $2 million. Firing is the right call. It is also exactly what the attacker is counting on. Do the subtraction, not the ratio. The fleet won every engagement it fought, and emptied the better part of $1 billion in launch cells to win them, trading $2 million rounds for $10,000 threats. The scoreboard read spotless. The magazine read the truth. Here is why that is more dangerous than it sounds. A destroyer carries 96 vertical launch cells, and there is no refilling them out there. A rearming system for open water is being tested, but no fleet does it at scale today. The magazine is a countdown clock. Every cheap drone that forces an expensive shot moves that clock forward, and the attacker does not need a hit to profit. Forcing the spend is the attack. And this is where it finally reaches the carrier. A carrier never sails alone. The loaded cells on its ring of escorts are its real shield, and those cells are finite. So an enemy never has to find the carrier to threaten it. Flood the escorts with throwaway drones until their magazines run dry, and the ring around it is no shield at all. That leaves two bad choices: sail on under protection that has spent itself, or pull the escorts back to rearm in port. The very retreat that emptied Sevastopol arrived at from the opposite end. The fleet's answer is not a bigger missile, it is a cheaper one, and the point is not the accounting, it is the magazine. Over the Red Sea, American fighters began killing drones with APKWS, laser-guided 2.75-inch rockets, roughly $30,000 a shot, dropping the ratio from 200 to 1 down toward 3 to 1. But the deeper win is depth. Those rockets pack many to an aircraft, and every drone one of them kills is a $2 million cell left loaded for a threat that genuinely needs it. The countdown clock stops being spent on targets built to waste it, which is the whole game. That same logic is now bolted onto the ships. The Coyote, a loitering drone killer at roughly $100,000 a round instead of millions, already going aboard the destroyers that screen a carrier, the escort USS Bainbridge the first to carry it. And the fleet is buying the cheap side of the equation for itself, too. Robot boats by the hundred under newly formed squadrons. A crewless 135-foot trimaran that sailed out of San Diego inside a carrier strike group. The first robot ship deployed as a working piece of the formation, not an experiment riding along. If a cheap, patient, expendable hull is what rewrites the arithmetic, the Navy would rather own that hull than only have to answer it. The fleet keeps the Standard Missile for the threats it was built to kill. In exchange, it accepts a cheaper class of bullet for a cheaper class of war. That is the third note, and the first time in this whole story that the defender, not the attacker, moved the price. Drive the cost of a shot down before the magazine itself becomes the target. Now put the three pieces side by side and the question changes shape. That ratio never measured the ship, it measured the conditions around it. The three Sevastopol gave away at once, which is why the raid looked like a revolution instead of a receipt. And that makes the three a tool, one you can borrow. The next time a headline crows that a cheap drone has made some proud warship obsolete, don't argue about the drone. Ask what the harbor handed the attacker for free. And watch how much of the shocking ratio was the conditions, not the weapon. Run the fleet through it, and the open ocean takes back the two that mattered most. Motion turns the search into a 1,000,000 square mile lottery. Distance strips away the attacker's free reach. What it cannot refund is the invoice. The price of a defensive shot sails with the fleet, into the Red Sea, through every escort's magazine, across the Pacific. Geography can hide the carrier. It still cannot make the bullet cheap. which means the fight underneath every headline was never drone versus carrier. It is repricing against repricing. And the fleet across the Pacific has read that more clearly than anyone, spending billions to rebuild Sevastopol's free conditions in open water. That is the real contest. Which side can make the other's next shot more expensive, faster? And here's the one number that should worry an engineer more than any ratio painted on a drone. Wars now revise their price lists in months, while fleets are still built on contracts that run for decades. Look at that harbor, one more time. And if you have read it this far the way an engineer reads it, conditions first, weapons second, then you already think like the rest of this channel. That is the whole reason Navy Decoded exists, to hand you the math before anyone hands you the headline. Stay with us, and the next war we take apart, you will read it before the headline sells you a number. It is not a monument to a wonder weapon. Nothing in that water was a wonder weapon. It is a monument to a price, a fleet that kept paying the old rates in a war that had already reprinted the price list, until the only move left was to leave. An American carrier does not inherit that harbor's fate. The open ocean bills the attacker for everything Sevastopol gave away: the search, the reach, the sitting target. But the Navy did not leave the front row with a sigh of relief. It left with 3 notes, and it is already spending money on every one of them. Do not fear the ratio. Study the conditions that print it. Keep the carrier moving and the enemy's picture broken, and drive down the price of a defensive shot before the magazine becomes the target. Cheaper interceptors are already bolted to the escorts. Robot boats are already putting to sea by the hundred. The notes are turning into steel. And that is the lesson that outlasts every drone in that water. A weapon is only as revolutionary as the conditions around it. And those conditions are being rewritten right now, in months, by both sides of the Pacific. The old fleet died in that harbor because it kept paying yesterday's prices. The side that reprices faster owns tomorrow's sea. Which leaves one question worth carrying out of that empty harbor. When the next cheap weapon reprints the price of war, will the fleet be the one writing the new number, or the one still paying the old one?